A big announcement from YouTube today banning anti-vaccine content from its popular platform. Our fact-check team digging into what the policy actually says and the laws granting tech companies the authority to set those bans.
Megan, YouTube says it is cracking down on anti-vax content. Under this new policy, YouTube will terminate the channels of what it deems prominent vaccine misinformation content creators, including the Children's Health Defense Channel affiliated with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. YouTube is also taking down channels that promote widely unproven claims that COVID-19 vaccines cause cancer, infertility, or autism, or that those vaccines contain microchips. Axios also reporting tonight that YouTube has taken down more than 1 million videos for violating its overall COVID-19 medical misinformation policy. The fact-check team here joining me tonight to break this all down. Janae.
Ryan, we're seeing headlines that are saying YouTube is banning all anti-vaccine content. That's not quite the case. In fact, they will allow some anti-vaccine content if the purpose of the content is to condemn, dispute, or satirize misinformation. Now, if users provide additional content or if someone is offering a personal experience they've had with the vaccine. Now, take a look at YouTube's list of things that they will ban. So this is content about vaccines approved and confirmed to be safe by local authorities and by the World Health Organization. That includes harmful information about the vaccine's safety, the efficacy of the vaccines, and the ingredients in the vaccines.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discussion right now around Congress as to how to regulate tech companies specifically for this sort of policy, this sort of censorship, if you will. We actually have policies on the books right now from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course YouTube. Facebook expanded its content criteria back in February. Twitter put out a policy that penalizes false vaccine claims back in March. But all of these policies are legal because they're private companies and because they have the ability to essentially step outside of and regulate their own company, right? And so then those things fall under Section 230, which is essentially the law that allows them to have that freedom from any sort of government intervention.
Yeah, and certainly those laws are always a moving target because there is a digital divide and technology is always evolving. Later from the fact-check team, we will further dive in to that Section 230 law and Congress's ongoing efforts to change that.
Well, with the expansion of YouTube's content regulation policy, much of the discussion is around internet speech and Section 230. It's a law that's only 26 words long. Our fact-check team talking with a legal expert about 230 and what might be done down the road to change it.
The fact-check team is back digging deeper into that tech law commonly known as Section 230, and John and Janae, continued efforts by lawmakers to potentially change that law.
Right, so right now what we're talking about when we say Section 230, and bear with me here, it's actually this Section 230 under Title 47 of U.S. law. So Title 47 is focused on telecommunications, and this portion of Title 47 was added in 1996. I talked with Lisa Garber, a legal expert, and she told me how Section 230 is written to essentially ensure that private platforms online wouldn't have any sort of penalties, right? So the thought being that lawsuits would severely limit the amount of commerce and traffic and use that would happen in terms of the internet. So Section 230 specifically states, no provider or user of an interactive computer system shall be treated as the publisher or speaker of any information provided by another information content provider. Okay, cutting through the jargon there, essentially Section 230 allows these companies to regulate what is published on their platforms.
Basically protection to give them creative free will over their own product. And speaking of those protections, Janae, you've been looking into this. They are private businesses that can and cannot allow access to certain individuals and users as they see fit.
Right, and so these policies aren't really based on any legal standard, but they're more of a subjective standard that YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter have come up with. They hire hundreds of people to help them build and enforce these policies, and it's all within their right to do so. So there's been a number of bills introduced over the years to offer changes to Section 230. Take a look at your screen. I want to point out this first bill, the Safe Tech Act, that was introduced in February of this year, that was introduced by Democratic Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. So what this would do, it would try to address a clause for public health concerns. And then there's some other legislation that's being drafted right now by Republican Congresswoman Kathy McMorris Rogers of Washington and Republican Congressman Jim Jordan of Ohio. Now, they have this draft legislation that looks to rein in big tech abuses of Section 230 protections. But none of these bills have ever passed Congress. There's a concern that any erosion of the current system would cause a slippery slope in the law that puts any internet business in the pathway of a lawsuit. And remember, these websites and internet-based tech companies, we don't pay to use them, but they need money. What we do, we pay them with things like our data, our viewing ads, and our screen time. Now, if Section 230 changes, their whole economy changes too.
And reining in some issues with big tech has seemingly been a bipartisan issue. That is for sure. Stay with us. Much more from the Fact Check team coming up a little later.
Our Fact Check team clearing up a vexing concern with these new YouTube content policies. If the government can mandate vaccines, why can't they influence these speech policies? Ryan Smith with our Fact Check team for the breakdown.
The Fact Check team is back tonight tackling that big tech news of the day. We're hearing from some who now question how lawmakers can mandate vaccines in private businesses, but John, not regulate vaccine content on those popular social media platforms.
Right, and I know this can be a little bit frustrating, but essentially public health law is about workplace safety and falls into a whole nother realm of law. We talked a little bit earlier about how internet-based tech companies operate this way because of how Section 230 is written. Public health side of things, the government can really enforce a number of different policies, but when it comes to these internet-based tech companies, they have very little government involvement.
And the internet is fairly new, so there's a lot of discussion around regulating harm from internet use. For instance, regulations meant to protect children are still very much in debate, even though there's a bipartisan support for the passage of some kind of law.
We will keep an eye on this moving forward. John and Janae here from the Fact Check team. Remember, the research and resources our investigative producers here and cover tonight. That will be all posted online so you can confirm for yourself.